So today I want to discuss something that I think is very important. And once you understand this, everything that is happening right now, the war in Iran, the dollar weakening, the political chaos in America, all of it will make complete sense to you because it is not random. It is a pattern that has repeated itself across 3,000 years of human history. And right now, America is following that pattern almost perfectly. Let me introduce you to a historian named Sir John Glubb. Most people have never heard of him. He is not very famous, but I think he is one of the most important historians of the 20th century. He was a British general and scholar who spent his entire career studying empires. Not one empire, not two, but all of the great empires in history. The Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, the Mongols, the Ottomans, the Spanish, the British. After studying all of these empires, he published a short book called The Fate of Empires. In that book, he made one of the most remarkable observations in all of historical scholarship. He said, all empires, without exception, go through the same stages, the same sequence every single time. And the average lifespan of a great empire is 250 years. Hold that number in your head, 250 years. America is 249 years old. So let us go through the stages, because once you understand them, you will understand exactly where America is right now and why what is happening was always going to happen. Stage one is what Glubb calls the age of conquest. Every empire begins the same way: lean, hungry, disciplined, with raw energy, expanding through military and economic superiority. At this stage, there is no corruption because there is no wealth yet to be corrupt. No complacency because there is no comfort yet to be complacent about. The soldiers are motivated, the leadership is focused, the purpose is clear. For America, this is the period from roughly 1776 through World War II. America fights a revolution against the greatest empire in the world and wins. It expands across a continent. It develops the largest industrial economy ever seen. Then, in World War II, it does something unprecedented. It fights on two fronts simultaneously across both the Atlantic and the Pacific against two major powers and defeats both. Think about what that required. 18-year-old boys landing on Normandy Beach knowing most would be killed. Soldiers fighting in jungles with unfamiliar diseases, factories running 24/7, women leaving their homes to build ships and aircraft. That is stage one: sacrifice, focus, hunger, discipline. When it was over, America did not just win the war, it rebuilt its enemies. The Marshall Plan, Bretton Woods. The dollar becomes the world's reserve currency. 800 military bases built around the world. America, at the peak of stage one, was genuinely the most powerful civilization in human history. Stage two is the age of commerce. Once military dominance is established, it converts into economic dominance. The empire controls trade routes. Wealth flows toward the center. The standard of living rises. The middle class expands. For a brief golden period, the empire is simultaneously the most powerful and the most prosperous society in the world. For America, this is the 1950s and 1960s. The American middle class during this period was the strongest in the history of human civilization. Workers in factories could afford houses, cars, vacations, and college for their children on a single salary. The dollar was backed by gold. American manufacturing produced more than any country in history. American universities were the best in the world. American science put man on the moon. This is stage two, and it feels like it will last forever, but it never does. Stage three is the age of affluence. This is where it begins to go wrong, because wealth creates comfort, and comfort creates complacency, and complacency creates a very specific kind of thinking. We have always been dominant, therefore we will always be dominant. We do not need to sacrifice anymore. We do not need to be disciplined anymore. We already won. Here is where the military-industrial complex enters the picture. After World War II, America kept its war machine running. Eisenhower, a general himself, warned about this when he left office in 1961. He said, "Beware the military-industrial complex." He warned that a permanent military establishment combined with a large arms industry would acquire undue influence in the American government, and that influence would distort priorities. Instead of the military serving America's strategic interests would begin to serve the military. That is exactly what happened. Vietnam was the first clear sign. America spent over $800 billion in today's dollars fighting Vietnam. It lost 58,000 soldiers and accomplished nothing. It left, and Vietnam became communist anyway, with no accountability. No one asked why we spent this money and achieved nothing, because in stage 3, the purpose of military spending is no longer to win wars. The purpose is to keep the system going, to keep contractors profitable, generals employed, politicians funded by the defense industry. Winning or losing becomes almost secondary. During this period, America began to export its manufacturing to China and Southeast Asia because Wall Street discovered it was more profitable to make money from financial instruments than from making physical things. Factories closed. The middle class began to shrink. Wages stopped rising. American wages peaked in real terms in 1973 and have barely moved since. 50 years, and the average American worker has not gotten a real raise in 50 years. That is stage 3. Wealth at the top, stagnation at the bottom, and an establishment too comfortable to admit there is a problem. Now, stage 4, the critical stage, Glubb calls this the age of decadence. Decadence here does not mean moral failure or bad people. It means the system itself has become self-destructive, eating itself. 4 things happen simultaneously, and they reinforce each other, which is why no empire has ever escaped this stage. First, military spending becomes completely divorced from military results. America spends approximately $900 billion per year on its military. That is more than the next 10 countries combined. China, America's main strategic competitor, spends about $250 billion. Russia spends about $80 billion. America spends 11 times more than Russia on its military. Yet America could not defeat the Taliban in Afghanistan, a group of fighters in sandals with Kalashnikovs. America could not establish stability in Iraq after 20 years. Right now in Iran, America is spending $3 million interceptor missiles to try to stop $50,000 Iranian drones and failing. When the cost of an action consistently exceeds the benefit, a rational actor stops. That is basic game theory. But an empire in stage 4 cannot stop because the military-industrial complex has captured the political system. Defense contractors give money to politicians, politicians give contracts to defense contractors, generals retire and join defense contractor boards. The entire system is a closed loop that benefits from continued military spending regardless of results. The F-35 fighter jet costs $100 million each, took 26 years to develop, and exists not because it is the best strategic choice, but because it employs people in 45 of 50 states. Every senator who might vote against it has constituents who work on it. This is not stupidity. It is a system doing exactly what it is designed to do, but what it is designed to do is destroy the empire. Second, debt becomes existential. America currently has approximately $36 trillion in national debt, adding roughly $2 trillion more each year. America now spends approximately $1 trillion per year just on interest payments on that debt. Not to reduce the debt, not to pay it off, just to service the interest. $1 trillion in interest payments is more than the entire annual defense budget of any other country in the world. America spends more money paying interest on old debt than China spends on its entire military. Here is the debt trap. Once your debt reaches a certain size, you must borrow new money to pay the interest on old money, and the interest on the new money adds to the total debt, which requires more borrowing, which adds more interest. This is a mathematical spiral. The only exits are default, which destroys your currency, or inflation, which also destroys your currency. In either case, the currency collapses. Every bomb dropped on Iran costs money. Every interceptor missile costs $3 to $10 million. Every deployment costs money. America is adding the cost of this war on top of a debt that is already in a spiral. This is existential. Third, the empire weaponizes its currency until it cannot. After World War II, America created the Bretton Woods system and later the petrodollar system. The deal was simple. All global trade, especially oil, would be conducted in US dollars. That meant every country needed to hold US dollars in reserve, creating permanent global demand for the dollar so America could print money and run deficits in a way no other country could. This was the greatest economic privilege in history. For decades, America used it carefully. But in stage 4, the empire starts to weaponize its tools. America began using the dollar as a weapon. Sanctions against Russia, Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, freezing Russian central bank assets, $300 billion of them overnight. From a game theory perspective, if I am a country holding US dollar reserves and I watch America freeze $300 billion of Russian reserves, I now know my dollar reserves are not safe. They can be taken away if America decides it does not like my government. So I start moving my reserves out of dollars. I start building alternatives. That is exactly what happened. BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now many more, represents approximately 40% of global GDP. These countries are actively building payment systems that do not require the dollar. They are settling trade in local currencies. They are buying gold instead of dollars. Saudi Arabia, the foundation of the petrodollar system, is now selling oil to China in yuan. America thought it was punishing its enemies by weaponizing the dollar. What it actually did was give every country in the world the maximum possible incentive to build an alternative. It accelerated de-dollarization. This is stage 4 thinking, short-term power move producing long-term self-destruction. Fourth, the social fabric breaks from within. America has the highest rate of homelessness of any developed country. Infrastructure is crumbling, life expectancy has been declining, drug addiction is a national crisis, wages have been stagnant since 1973 in real terms. At the same time, wealth at the very top has exploded. The richest 1% of Americans now own more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. This is not natural. It is the result of deliberate policy choices over 50 years that systematically transferred wealth from the middle class to the financial elite. What does this produce politically? A population that has lost faith in its institutions, a population that can no longer agree on basic facts, a political system that produces 2 candidates in every election whom neither side fully trusts, a country that is simultaneously the wealthiest and the most internally fractured of any major power. An empire under external pressure, a war it cannot win, a currency under challenge, a debt it cannot repay, and simultaneously fracturing internally, faces a 2-front problem. Resources needed for external threats are consumed by internal problems and vice versa, each making the other worse. Rome faced exactly this in its final century, fighting barbarians on every border, spending money it did not have on unreliable legions while suffering currency debasement, political chaos, a collapsing middle class, and a population that had lost faith. The most important insight from game theory is the prisoner's dilemma at civilizational scale. Why don't the people in charge fix this? They can see the problem. Why not change course? Because every individual actor makes the rational choice for themselves, but the sum of those rational choices produces catastrophe for everyone. Inside the American empire right now, every powerful group makes a rational individual choice. Defense contractors need wars to sell weapons. If they stop lobbying for wars, they lose their business. Rational. Banks need dollar dominance to profit from global finance. They lobby against any alternative to the dollar. Rational. Politicians need defense contractor money and bank money to win elections. They support policies that benefit those industries. Rational. Media companies need advertising revenue. Defense contractors and banks are major advertisers. Media covers wars in ways that do not threaten those advertisers. Rational. Generals know their careers and post-retirement jobs depend on maintaining the current system. They do not challenge it. Rational. Every single decision is rational, but the sum total is a military that cannot win wars, a debt that cannot be repaid, a currency being abandoned, and a society fracturing from within. Collective destruction produced by individual rationality. No empire has ever escaped stage 4 from within because the prisoner's dilemma at this scale has no internal solution. Every person who could change the system benefits from it. Every person who might challenge it is either purchased or destroyed. Julian Assange tried to expose the system. Where is he? Edward Snowden tried. Where is he? The system does not reform itself. The only thing that changes the game is an external shock large enough to break the equilibrium. Stage 5 is collapse. Collapse does not mean the country disappears overnight. Rome did not fall in a day. The British Empire did not fall in a day. What happens is more gradual. 3 things simultaneously. First, a currency crisis. The reserve currency loses its privileged status. Countries stop accepting it. Import costs rise. Inflation explodes. Domestic purchasing power collapses. Second, a loss of allies. Countries that depended on the empire for protection start making other arrangements. They hedge. They develop relationships with the rising power. They stop showing up when the empire calls for coalition partners. Third, an internal political rupture. The domestic system, already fragile from decades of inequality and institutional erosion, breaks under additional stress. The population loses faith not just in this leader or that leader, but in the system itself. These 3 things do not require coordination or conspiracy. They just require the conditions of stage 4 to continue long enough, and then they converge. The British Empire in 1939 was still the largest in history. By 1949, it was over. World War II destroyed British finances, creating $30 billion in debt to America. India demanded independence and got it in 1947. Palestine, the jewel of British Middle Eastern strategy, collapsed in 1948. The dollar replaced the pound as the world's reserve currency by the end of the 1940s. Financial collapse, loss of empire, currency replacement, all in 1 decade. They saw individual problems but did not understand how they would converge. Now connect this to the present. America is at stage 4. 3 things are happening simultaneously right now that accelerate the timeline towards stage 5. First, a war it cannot win. Iran has been preparing for this war for 25 years. America went in with no plan beyond initial bombing. It is spending $3 million interceptors to stop $50,000 drones and failing. Its aircraft carrier had to leave the Persian Gulf. Its AWACS surveillance aircraft have been destroyed. Every day this war continues, it drains American resources, credibility, and political will. Because of the military-industrial complex and the prisoner's dilemma, America cannot simply stop. It can only double down. You go to the casino, you are losing $100,000. You cannot go home, so you keep gambling. That is the logic of empire in stage 4. Second, a debt it cannot repay. $36 trillion, $1 trillion in annual interest, now adding the cost of a war in Iran. At some point, this debt spiral produces a dollar crisis. When that happens, the most foundational tool of American power, the ability to print money and have the world accept it, is gone. Third, a currency the world is actively replacing. Saudi Arabia selling oil in yuan, BRICS building alternative payment systems, central banks buying gold at the highest level in 50 years. The de-dollarization that Iran sanctions accelerated is happening, not overnight, but irreversibly. When multiple independent actors, China, Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, India, Brazil, all independently make moves pointing toward the same outcome, the end of dollar dominance and American unipolar power. That is a dominant strategy convergence. It does not require coordination or conspiracy. Each actor pursues its own rational interest, but the convergence produces the same outcome, stage 5. Sir John Glubb studied every major empire. They all follow the same 5 stages. The average lifespan is 250 years. America is 249 years old. Right now, America is simultaneously experiencing all 4 defining characteristics of stage 4. Military spending divorced from results, existential debt, a weaponized currency being abandoned, and a fracturing social fabric while facing the external shock of a war it cannot win, a debt it cannot repay, and a currency being replaced. No empire that has reached stage 4 has escaped stage 5 without radical systemic change. The prisoner's dilemma tells us that radical systemic change from within an empire in stage 4 is almost impossible because every actor who could produce change benefits from the current system. The The question is not whether America reaches stage 5. The historical record across 3,000 years gives a 0% survival rate for empires at this stage without transformation. The question is only how fast and what comes next. Understanding how power transitions between empires is just as important as understanding why empires fall. This analysis is not meant to be pessimistic or anti-American. It is meant to be clear thinking. The purpose of predictive history is not to make predictions for their own sake, but to use the patterns of history to understand the present so we can think more clearly about the future. If this framework is wrong, we go back, look at the evidence, and revise our thinking. That is what good analysis looks like.